we're going to be looking at our product Data Viewer today, which is the data visualization and integration tool. So we're going to be using this in order to be able to connect to different data sources, both internally and externally to Microsoft SharePoint. So not just looking at the Microsoft 365 apps, things like Planner and OneDrive and so on, but also being able to connect to external data sources, which might be things like SQL or Oracle, could also be things like Jira and other online services as well, like ServiceNow and that type of thing. All right, so what we're going to do is, first of all, just dive straight into the data viewer and introduce that. And like I said, we'll be having lots of online demonstrations, just a few slides to set the scenes as to what you're going to see. What you are going to see is me configure the data viewer for different types of data sources. So we'll have a look at connecting via external connectors, also if we wanted to go against something like Excel, but we're also looking at some SQL databases and things like that as well. But that's not the complete list of data sources that you can connect to. Once we've connected to a few, you'll get the idea. And we'll have some time looking at how we can configure different variations, joining these web parts together, adding conditional formatting, and also building some charts as well, such as bar charts. There could be single series, multiple series charts. We can also build up pie charts and tree maps, that type of thing as well, which you'll see as we go through the configuration. Okay, so what is really unique about the data viewer is the fact that it is a product that is designed intentionally for, again, somebody that owns a SharePoint site. So if you create a new SharePoint site in your environment, maybe you're creating something for your team, it could actually be in Microsoft Teams as well. And you've got some data sources that you feel are necessary in order for people to be able to do their jobs better. So what you can do is actually add the web part onto the page. You can configure it for the data that you want to connect to, and then you can create some visualizations or reports around that data. And the intention here is that it's something that you can create yourself as a site owner. You don't have to be an expert in business intelligence or anything like that, or reach across to IT in order for them to build this for you. It's something that if you can build a chart in Excel, or if you can build an Excel workbook, then you'll be able to find your way around this web part. That's the intent. So that's the audience that we're looking for as consumers of the data viewer web part. So again, it can be added onto a modern SharePoint page, any page tool, and it can also be added as a tab inside of a team, or you can even add that SharePoint page, which contains multiple data viewer instances, as a dashboard, and add that into Teams as well, and interact that way. So in terms of what the data viewer does, so again, it's a modern SharePoint framework experience web part. I know there's a lot of confusion around this with the deprecation of apps. The Microsoft deprecation is not SPFX apps, it is add-ins, which we saw around sort of 2010, 2011 era with the introduction of Microsoft 365. They are the ones that are being deprecated, not the SharePoint framework web parts. These are still current and very supported in the recommended way of extending Microsoft SharePoint and Teams. So it's built under the SharePoint framework. Can be added just as a simple web part on 20 page, and you can configure it for multiple different data sources. So we can, as I mentioned, go against external data. You can also go against lists and libraries. The intent there is to not aggregate like our Lightning Conductor does. That's a completely different kettle of fish, but the data viewer allows us to connect to a list or a library. So quite often you'll hear people saying things like, there's a contact list that resides over in the sales team or something, and I need that in my marketing team. So you're not duplicating the content. We can just simply connect to that list and build out the report in whichever page we want it to work in. So you can connect to other lists and libraries anywhere inside the tenant as long as you've got permissions to them, and you can also style those lists and library views as well inside the data viewer. You can even create charts that are dynamic charts on the SharePoint lists. We can also connect to Excel. If anybody is as old as I am, you may remember Excel services. So Excel services was something that we used to use in SharePoint on premises, and it got deprecated. However, it was extremely useful. It allowed you to connect to tables and charts from an Excel workbook and display them inside of SharePoint. So this is exactly what we can do with the data viewer still. So if there's a live dynamic Excel workbook that's perhaps stored inside the document library inside the site that you're working in, rather than opening that file time and time again in order to be able to see the information, we can connect directly to it and we get a dynamic view that's automatically refreshed, and we'll be able to see that as a web part on the page or inside that team. We can also go against OData. So OData is a great way of connecting to other online or on-prem data sources. We can connect directly to SQL Azure. We can go via business connectivity services, although that is being deprecated. And we also have external connectors as well. So using the external connectors, this is how we can connect to pretty much anything we like. It could be websites or again, SQL on-prem or online databases, SQL Azure. We can get to Oracle, Salesforce, Jira, you name it. We can connect to it. We can actually create custom connectors, which allows us to connect to virtually anything at all. We can also display the content in different ways, which you'll see, and we can connect these web parts together. So the reason for connecting them together is to really sort of reflect the type of relationship that we might have inside of a relational database between some of the tables. So we could have one-to-many type joins or master detail type joins going on between the web parts. And this also integrates with some of our other web parts as well, like the Lightning Conductor and also the Lightning Filters web part, which we'll be taking a look at today as we go through the presentation. So in terms of building the data grid views, this is where we're going to start off with. So the data grid views are very similar to what you might build inside of a standard SharePoint list. So when you think of a SharePoint list, you're selecting the columns from the list that you want to see. You may add some column formatting, you may add some grouping, you could create calculated columns and so on. And really we can do all of that here as well with the data viewer, only we're not actually creating a list, we're creating a view of another data source. So, so that view again could be an external data source, or it could be a SharePoint list or library as well. I mentioned you can connect them together. So you'll notice here that we've got just a simple example. We've got customers, orders, and off the page here is order details. So we can select some of the customers. We will then see the orders for the customers that we selected. And as we select one of those orders, we will see details for that order. So we can navigate the data that way. And we can add conditional formatting and styling and so on to this view as well. So let's dive in and have a look at that. We take a look at some of the chart configuration. So I'm just going to jump into my page here, and we have a page inside of our SharePoint site. Within here, we've got a few instances of the data viewer already configured. So what you'll notice, we do have the filters web part, which is what we're going to be taking a look at. So at the moment, I've got the word road in there. If I type the word bike, you can see here that our first data viewer instance is refreshed without having to do a page refresh, dynamic refresh, and we're looking for the word bike in any of our products. So if there's a specific type of bike that we're interested in, such as mountain bikes, we can go through and select that one. That's actually returned null. There are no mountain bikes, so we could also select a few others. If I choose road bikes and touring bikes and so on, notice how this other instance of the data viewer, which is in the grid view, is in fact enumerating data for me. So we have the data end, and some of these charts are also connected to that web part. So if I was interested in some of the sales information for some of these road bikes, I could start to click them and notice that again, there's not necessarily all the related data. Let's just do a select all and see what. There we go. So it's now built a chart based on the information that I selected from that web part. So that web part doesn't have to act on a filter. It could be a standalone web part that's dynamic, saying that the charts, we're just telling it to consume the filter from our data grid in order to be able to show the relevant data coming from the chart to get more of a sort of dynamic page going on. Unconnected is just a couple of other instances showing you a 3D pie chart that we can build with the data viewer, and then we also have a tree map as well, showing some information, and that's based on the colors of these bikes and how many we have in stock and so on. Okay, so that's the sort of thing that we're going to be building as we go through the presentation. So what I'm going to do first of all is add a new page. I hope. Apart from the add a new page link has decided not to. Oh, there we go. It's coming. Right, yeah. So we're getting a new page. Now we're going for new pages probably. Here we go. So we'll give that a name. So we're just going to call this data viewer demo. And in here, we can add, if we want to, different column layouts. So depending on the type of dashboard that you might want to create, you may want to have two columns, or sometimes working with charts, it helps if you have data reports that have slightly wider than half the page. So you could go to 1/3 left and 2/3 right, or something like that. I'm just going to switch onto the two column layout here. And over on the left, we're going to add a data viewer instance. So notice how we can just simply go through and select the data viewer control, drop that onto the page, and we're also going to add a few more than that. So I'll just stick them on the right-hand side there as well. And going into the web part, you'll notice we've got a configure button in the middle where we can configure the whole thing. But clicking onto the properties, we also get to set web part titles. And this is actually quite a useful thing when you're joining the web parts together. Otherwise, they're all going to be called data viewer web part. So it's quite good to have a name. So I'm just going to call this one the product category. There we go. So I know which web part that is. You'll notice some other properties in here, such as the ability to build out multiple views. You can also set up an icon if you want to for the web part and what have you. I'm actually going to eventually hide this command bar and the title anyway, which you'll see once I get there. But yeah, we can have multiple views. So this could be one view of the data that might be a grid, and then another view inside the same web part instance could also be a chart. So we could go in and add multiple views like so. But since this is going to be more of a dashboard, I'm just going to stick to the one view currently. So I'll leave the name as default. That's fine. Let's just hit configure. And when we're configuring the web part, we've basically got 4 different tabs down on the left-hand side. So the first one is just really telling the data viewer what we're likely to connect to inside this instance and how do we want to display it. So whether it's going to be a grid view or a chart view. And there's a couple of other things like we've got limit the number of items coming back, and we've also got a refresh interval, which we can also configure as well. So if you've perhaps got a display inside your office and you want dynamic data being refreshed automatically every few seconds without somebody having to refresh the screen, that's the sort of thing that we can configure here with the data refresh interval. So that's what that tab is. The data source tab, the next one down, is going to change based on the first option. So here it's expecting me to choose a SharePoint list. So this is where I can go and navigate to a SharePoint list somewhere and then bring that list into this site where I'm currently at. So I could go under Brett's Bikes, for example, and as we expand through the Brett's Bikes site, you'll notice that we've got things like an inventory list and so on that we could connect to from there. Going back up, we could change that from a SharePoint list again to BCS. We won't spend too much time on that since that is now deprecated. We do have an OData service that we could connect to. So if we choose OData and go to the data source tab, notice how this is expecting an OData URL. And if you're interested in having a play around, you can always go to odata.org. I saw, under references, we could connect to a sample database like this Northwind database. So if I take the service URL to that, it gives us the ability to have a good play around. Oops, find the page I'm on. There we go. with some data and the data viewer. So we can connect to that service, hit load entities. It's going to return for me some of the different tables and views coming from that. If I was to just click products, for example, we're then into choosing the columns that we want from that data source. And we may as well just finish this one off, and I'll go in and reset it. But you should see, there we go, we've got some data coming back from that service very easily. So let's just clear that configuration and go back in. So that's OData. We also have SQL Azure. So this, again, allows me to configure a connection to SQL if we want to. There is a preferred way of connecting to SQL, and that would be through using a Microsoft Graph connector. That way there's no connection string or anything stored inside a web part. You'd have actually had to have configured the external connector inside of SharePoint admin first, which is in here. So this is actually the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. If you look for search and intelligence and then go to data sources, you can add any of these other data sources. So you could configure a SQL Azure connection or a SQL on-prem connection. We can also go against an Oracle database, and these are basically the connectors that we're able to consume with the data viewer. So you'll see, if I just go back a level, these are the ones that I've already configured that you're going to recognize in just a moment. So there's one here called Jira Demo as an example. So that was refreshed 44 minutes ago. It's got 337 items indexed. So what we can do is go and select this option, go to our data source, and in the drop down, we're seeing those same connectors as what you see here inside the admin center. So if I choose the Jira demo, that's all I need to do, because all of the configuration and the connections is done through the search and indexing center. If I go to the columns, this is where I can now start to choose the columns I wish to see, and we can go through and configure how we want to display this. So I'm just going to not do any formatting for a moment, but there we go. You can see we've got that data coming back from Jira, which is another online application. Okay, so there's a couple of different things that we've seen configured so far. We've also got Excel. So if I wanted to configure a connection to that, again, we can go through, similar to how we choose another list inside a site. We're just basically going to navigate to a document library somewhere that contains an Excel workbook. And as soon as I choose the library, we're able to select which is the workbook I want to work with. You can choose the range of data and hit save, and we can now get the columns returned from that Excel workbook, and again we can display the data from them as well. Yeah, they're the a few different data sources and how we might go about configuring them. So I'm going to go directly to SQL. Initially, we're going to focus on a grid view, and my data source. Just going to go and grab here the location of this information. Let me just cancel that actually, because it should be done for me. Okay, great. And then we're going to put in the database name and hit load entities. Okay, so we've connected to the database. We're connected to the AdventureWorks database, and we can now go through and choose a table or a view that we would like to use inside this this web part instance. So what we're going to work with first of all is one called product product category. So I'm just going to choose that table. And when we go to the columns tab, you can see the columns that are returned. And this is very similar to designing a relational database. Of course, you have primary keys and foreign keys inside the SQL database. So in order for my web part connections to work, I also need that, because I'm going to be filtering on those columns as well. So I'm going to choose the product category ID as well as the name column. And these are the only two useful columns available to me. But while we're on here, notice the other things that we can do. So we can add calculated columns if we want to. So if we want to do some string manipulation, or if we want to do some calculations around some of the different columns using expressions, we can do that. We can also apply cross-column filters or just single column filters. We can also set our sort criteria, and we can drag and drop the columns in the order we want them to appear in as well. So top to bottom effectively equals left to right inside the web part. And then under the display, this is where we can set our display properties. So you may want to configure these as currency and so on, depending on the field type. You can set the column alignment for the values. You can do the grouping. You can do color formatting, conditional formatting, and there's a bunch of other properties as well. So you can change the fonts, change the color of the fonts. You can make them multi-line, and you can even copy and paste the custom formatting coming from your SharePoint list directly into here as well. So if you are connecting to a SharePoint list and you've already done some column formatting and you spent a lot of time on writing the JSON, you can copy paste that JSON and have the same column formatting reflected here inside the web part. So once we've got the two columns selected, we can do other things like show the header. We can have sticky headers, which is new. We've also got the column header alignment, which we can change. We can allow selecting of rows, which I want to do because I'm going to connect these web parts together. And we can also add our pagination options and so on as well. If we are connected to SQL, notice how we've also got some write back. So we can allow the insert, update, and delete options around those data sources as well. So I'm just going to save that one. And notice we now have our grid of data coming back. And we can, as you can see, dynamically arrange the column widths and so on. If ever you want to fix those in stone, you can also do that. So we can go to the product ID column here, and I can actually set a column width so that that's fixed as opposed to being dynamic, if you like. So we've got that one created, and notice how I can now select the multiple rows. That's basically what that was referring to. So that's our first web part. In order to be able to filter that, you can, of course, come into the column headers and hit filter. So we could filter here. I could say contains caps and hit caps. There we go. So so we've got that selected, and we can go through and remove that filter. Okay, so filters working there. But what would be better would be to add the filter web part. And the filter web part is actually a free tool that you can just use with the Lightning Conductor, or you can also use with the data viewer as well. And it allows for different types of filter controls. So notice how we've got a number filter where you have a slider. So if you wanted to be able to select a range of numbers, you could do that, or you could use the field for the number. And we've also got text and choices, people filters. There's a taxonomy filter. You've even got a SharePoint tree filter where you can go through and filter by site, etc. If you would like. What we're going to work with here is just a standard text filter. So we have that, and we can also give it a default value. I'm going to put default value of bike in there. And we can change the heading here. So I can say, please search for a product type. Okay, so so it becomes clear as to what the user is meant to do with this. So in order to be able to pass that value through to my first data viewer, we're going to go back into the data viewer properties, into the column configuration, and then against the name column here, we're going to add a filter, and it's just basically going to be a contains. And instead of putting a value in here, we're going to use this connector to connect it to the please search for product type web part. So we'll select that one, and let's choose the filter value in here and save that. So what you'll notice as we go through is we're now filtering the list of products against bikes, and we can change that to things like touring, or we could change it to, I think it was caps, there we go, and road, and so on. So we've got a nice little filter working there. Let's just put the word bike back in. There we go. So we've got this returning a limited set up to now. So let's just go through and actually hide some of the properties that we don't really need to see inside there. So that's the first web part connected. We're just going to go across to another instance. Let's add the data viewer again beneath this one. And we're going to go against the same data source, also with a grid view. Just grab that from there and put in the name of the database. If I didn't know the name of the database, by the way, I could just hit the load entities and it will give me a list of databases that I could pick from. And what we're going to do is go against the product table. So in terms of the columns, I would like to see, notice how we've got things like the name. What's important again is the product category ID. Yeah, so we can filter on that, and then we've also got things like the color, the list price, and so on as well that we also might want to add to this one. So we're just returning a bit more information against that item. And when it comes to formatting it, we've got things like currency that we can set for the list price. So we can set all of the different properties for those. And again, we can add our pagination and so on. And so what we're then going to do is consume a connection from this product category. So we can go into the filters and select from another data viewer instance. So this is why I named the data viewer. So notice how it's got product category in the name. So we're going to choose that, and then we're going to say work with the selected items, and what we're after is the product category ID that was selected. So so what we should have now is a list of the products, and as we go through and select those products, this one is filtered out based on what we're choosing. So we now have three filters or three ways of data we can search using the filter web part to limit the items returned in the product category, and then we can limit them further using the data viewer here. Now, whilst we're in here, what we could also do, let's just deselect some of those so you can see more of the formatting. We can work visually with inside the web part itself. So what we might want to do, for example, is come into the list price here, and under formatting, we could add some conditional formatting. So if I choose the list price, for example, we can say if it's greater than 1,000, then what we're going to do is go through and maybe set a color or something like that. So we could choose a pill color. We can have it red because it's a high value price. Let's just tone down the shade a little bit. And let's just save that. Okay, so you can see anything over 1,000 is now being highlighted as a high cost. And of course, we can go through and add the others as well for that one. Okay, so that's how we can also add conditional formatting. You can also group. So we've got the color of the products. We might want to group by that. So now we've got all the blue products together, all the red products together, all the black products together, and so on. Okay, so yeah, you can really work with the way that data is being reported using that grid view. All right, so moving on to some of the charts that you can create. We're going to take a look at different types of charts here. So we have multi-series charts that you can see here, meaning we've got more than one column that contains a value that we want to display on the chart. So they can be displayed in different ways. So we've got a mixture of an area as well as a column chart, and we're grouping by the ship country in that particular example. But there's other types of charts as well. So you've got the combo charts like this one. You can have just a bar, just an area, just a scatter, and just a line. There's also pie and donut charts. You have tree maps, gauges, and there's actually also geo maps that you can add as well. So so let's just jump back into the view, and we'll add some of these charts. So once more, I'm just going to hit configure, and we'll jump back down to SQL Azure, and we're going to need to select the chart view this time rather than the grid view. So once more, just provide the credential information, the database that we're working with, and we're going to consume the different tables or views. So we've got one here called the sales order detail that we're going to go against. So we'll just select the column information again. So in here, there's a series of different columns. We have the product ID, which I did add to the list of products, so we can consume the connection from that one. But notice that we've also got things like unit price discount, and we've also got order quantity. Now I can add to that with the calculated column. If I decide that I also want the order value to be displayed, we can add order value as a column name. The type is going to be a double. And in here, we can now take the order quantity. We could multiply that by the unit price and take away the discount if that's how it's calculated. So we'll go through and add that. And now we've got our new column here called order value that we could also place within our chart as well. So once we've selected the columns, we can go across to the display. So you can see the order value is in here. Color selection isn't looking great when it's such a fine chart like that. What we're going to do is group here by the product ID. So let's just hit group on that one. So we're seeing a bit less data. And we don't need to see all of this information necessarily. So I could now take away the discount. I'll just use that as part of the calculation. We may not need to see the unit price, and we certainly don't want to see the product ID. So that's just leaving us the order quantity. In fact, let's just do that. Swap those around. That'll do. Okay, so how we can get to this multi-series chart, the order value, let's first of all change the color, and we'll also change it to a column. I'm going to go with the theme color so that it will blend nicely with my site. I could also add a trend line if I wanted to, and I can choose a color for the trend line. That we want it to be quite a bright color, so it's going to stand out. And we've now got the trend line added to the chart, as well as the columns. And then the unit price here, we'll go through and set that. It can stay pink if it wants to, but let's make it an area. There we go. So as we save this chart, notice we've got the chart with all the information coming back currently, but we also want to set a filter on this one as well. So we can go back into the columns, and on the product ID, we're going to grab the product ID from the data viewer that I didn't name. So we'll go through and select that one, and we'll work again with the selected items. And it's the product ID that we're going to consume. Okay, so we'll save all of that. And so currently we're seeing all of the products charted on here, or all the sales for the products. But what we can now do is say that actually we're just interested in some of that information coming from this web part here. So let's just turn on the selection of rows, which I obviously forgot to do. There we are. And now we could maybe do a select all, the blue ones and all the red ones. And you can see that's being dynamically displayed within inside our chart now. Okay. And once more, we can hide those, which just looks a bit there if you don't need to see it. You can provide a web part title as well. So let's give that a title saying order value for selected items. Okay, so next one we'll add, we'll just show a pie chart configuration. So again, we'll go against the same data source. Sorry, that was wrong selection here. Oh, AdventureWorks and load the entities. Okay, so we've connected here. Let's go and choose a table. So this one is going to be the product table. Column-wise, we're going to select the color, the name, and the product ID. And we're going to change this over to a pie chart. So so notice how we can now perform a group. So we want to let's count the product IDs, and we're grouping by color. So we've now got our pie chart, and we could go through and again configure the different colors. We can also offset some if we wanted to focus on something within there, we can, and we can also make this 3D if we want to. You can change the background color, you can provide a chart title, etc., and have that displayed on the page. So let's just go through and save that one. And we've now got our 3D pie chart. So really simple to go through and configure the different types of charts there. Okay, so that's configuring charts. The only thing I wanted to show you is just connecting to a different type of data source. So we'll this time add the Lightning Conductor, which some of you may be familiar with. The Lightning Conductor is a web part in its own right, separate web part to the data viewer. But what we can do with this one is actually aggregate content. So one of the things we could do here is connect to, let's say, tasks, and we want those tasks coming from our current site and associated websites. So we're going to display that with inside a grid view. So we have that information being aggregated, and there's just a handful of tasks here that we're going to be bringing back from within the hub, hopefully. Okay, yeah, it did take a while, you're right. So yeah, there's a handful of different tasks there. And what I could do with the data viewer, by combining these two web parts, we could take the data viewer and connect to the Lightning Conductor. So we can basically create charts on our aggregated content. So in here, we can choose the current page as the data source. And we'll go to the chart view. And now we can say it's the Lightning Conductor that I want to connect to. And this time, rather than selected items, we're going to go with retrieved items. And so when we go to the columns, it's returning the columns that are available from the lists that I'm aggregating from. So in here, we've got things like the priority, and we've also got the status and the ID. So in fact, I'm just going to go with status and ID. And we're going to change here to a tree map. And we're going to tell this size column is that one. Let's do a count of the IDs, or some of the IDs. Okay, so not too much data being returned, obviously, but we've got a tree map coming back, so it's showing each status with a different. There we go. Each status with a different color and different size based on the number that there are, and then we can go into the chart settings here and change those colors. So the minimum color is going to show in red for the smallest square. We could actually set that as theme color, and the maximum color, we're going to go back to, yeah, maybe a lighter shade of blue. Let's just do it that way. And yeah, obviously didn't save that right, but you can see here the colors being applied. As those shapes get smaller, they'll get bluer, and so on. Okay, so completely different types of charts that you can create, and eventually we end up with a very dynamic dashboard that we can work with, starting with the filter web part and having those all interconnected web parts display the content on the page here. Okay, so let's jump into a few more slides. So you've just seen how we can connect the data viewer to one of our other products, which is the Lightning Conductor. So that allows us to build charts on aggregated content. Other examples that you could, one of them being Lightning Forms. So Lightning Forms is our form with the form design tool. Of course, you can go in and build business forms inside of SharePoint lists, or you can customize the forms for the SharePoint lists. And we're collecting data basically. So that data collected into the SharePoint forms that contain sublists as well. So again, you've got that one-to-many type join between the lists, and we can reflect that in the data viewer. So if you then want to report against your data that is being collected inside the forms, the data viewer gives you an ideal opportunity to do that in a, again, dynamic connected way. And you could also chart on that data that's being returned from the forms as well. There's also the integration with Social Squared. So if you're familiar with Social Squared, that is our discussion board tool. Quite often when we're using discussion boards or any sort of social platform, you want to be able to report on what is going on inside that content. So are people reading it? Are they looking at certain forums? Are people's questions going answered or unanswered, and so on? So because the content for Social Squared actually resides inside of SharePoint lists, you could use the data viewer in order to be able to build dashboards and report on that content as well. So there's lots of integration with our products or many other products. If they're using SharePoint lists or if they're using some sort of data source outside of SharePoint, you'll be able to chart on that content using the data viewer. So a little bit of what's new. So if you already use the data viewer, you may have noticed some minor improvements as I've been going through, things like grouping, linking in the hyperlinks on the columns. We've also got improved input validation as well. So if you're writing back to the data sources, we can make sure that the validation is right before, of course, the data gets committed in the back end. But the main thing we want to focus on here is some Viva integration. So if you're using Viva Connections, we now have adaptive cards for the data viewer. So let's just jump into that before we open up for a Q&A. So what I'm going to do actually is just take, first of all, the URL of this particular site. Yeah, we've got the, so for this page. So I've got the page URL here, and all of this was actually created in a Viva Connections site. So we're just going to go to the home page of that Viva Connections site, and in the top right-hand corner of a Viva Connections site, we can go in and manage the Viva Connections. So if we choose that, we can then view the dashboard. And the dashboard basically gives us a desktop and a mobile dashboard. So if we wanted to be able to see high-level business information coming through on our phones, we can go to the Viva Connections app and we can display different adaptive cards to different types of information. You'll see a few of our products are in. This one here is actually the Lightning Conductor. It's pointing at a instance of the Lightning Conductor and showing how many documents it's retrieved, and you can actually go in and view those items. So you can see the documents being returned as part of the aggregation. So it's a quick way of gaining access to those documents that are being aggregated throughout our environment. These two here are social squared, so we can see how many unanswered topics there are within inside a social squared instance. And yeah, we could view those. We can mark them as answered and that sort of thing as well. And then this one is actually the data viewer. So it's displaying a line chart there. So if you've got information that you want to see every day, it may be sales revenue or stock counts or whatever it might be, you don't have to go to the page in SharePoint that contains the web part. That's the starting point, but then you can have a summary displayed as an adaptive card as well. So if we just edit the page here, again, this is the mobile view, and then we've also got the desktop view. So I'm just going to work on the desktop view just so we've got a bit more space. We can add a new card, and you'll see different cards that Microsoft has created. There's also a card designer that you can work with, and yeah, there's also different types of cards that you'll find inside the app source, which are suggested ones. So there's Viva Learning as well, and things like that. That you can also work with. This one here is very useful, the Teams app. You can point it to Microsoft Teams and select an app inside there and display some of the information coming from that app. But with the data viewer, we're just going to add this new line chart. Now, the reason why this is currently only line charts and not bar charts and pie charts and tree maps that you've seen is because this is actually brand new from Microsoft. So they've given you the ability to create line charts, adaptive cards, and they are going to follow with more chart types. But at the moment, they're only offering line charts. So what we can do is just provide the page URL in here that contains the data viewer web part instance that we want to work with. So hence why I copied the URL. And now we've got a choice of all those web parts that I've been configuring. A good reason to name them. But we can take a guess that that one's going to be the products. And in here, we can select which column is going to be our axis. So we'll choose the product category ID, and then which one is going to be the data. So we can go through and select that. Again, you've got audience targeting and so on that you can go through and add. And if we just save and republish that, we should hopefully get our line chart being drawn. There we go. A little bit messy because there's a lot of products, but yeah, it's drawn some form of chart. Quite difficult to read, but yeah, we could obviously filter that down and display less information and get a useful chart. You can also configure things like the colors and so on, and depending on what Microsoft do with that adaptive card, we'll be able to adopt some of those properties in the future as well. So let's just go back into the properties in here, and you'll notice that. So let's just select it one more time. There we go. So we've got the color picker, so we can go with a custom color. And republish, we should get that color applied and so on. So, or not. So that is oh, there we go. Just took a while. So that's the new adaptive card. So we're allowing you to build out these web parts with inside of SharePoint and just display that summary information. Again, that can be displayed on a mobile device or on the Viva Connections homepage, which of course can also be added to Teams. So this can be your sort of Teams homepage if you like. So if we navigate here into Teams, let's just open that in a new tab. And just whilst that's loading, what we're going to do is edit this. And then within here, we are, let's add a one column section here. Okay, so we'll add the dashboard that we created, the Viva Adaptive Card dashboard. So that's being displayed. Of course, we could change the layout and so on. And let's just republish that. And we'll jump across to Teams, which is almost there. And we'll be able to add that same Viva Connections homepage into Teams. Not sure why that's taking too long. But yeah, in the meantime, I will open up for some questions. Let's just see if anybody has any. Okay, and what I'm going to show you is just the Viva homepage just whilst you have your questions. So yeah, there is a chat pane. Hopefully you found that. I do see messages saying people can't hear. I apologize for that very start. This is the first time we've used this platform. That's not the platform's problem, it was my problem. But yeah, it was just a bit of a learning experience, not enabling my microphone there. So yeah, apologies for that. There is one question that says, I believe you mentioned geomapping data. Is that associated with Google Maps API key field? Yes, it is. That's exactly what that's for. So yeah, you will need a Google Maps API key, and then you'll be able to configure the data viewer to work with dynamic maps as well. And yeah, here you can see Viva inside of Teams, and you can see how those adaptives look with the data view embedded on them to get that summary information coming across. Okay, and another question here, can the SharePoint list from a different site collection be selected as a data source? Yeah, absolutely. So when you're configuring the data source here, you can connect to any list that you have access to. So it could be any site collection, any hub within inside of that SharePoint tenant.